Hello dear learners, welcome back to my channel. In our previous video, we had learnt about the various AOP concepts. As you can see here on the screen, these are the various concepts that we had spoken about, and we had understood what exactly each of these concepts mean. Of all these concepts, one of the very important concept was advice. As you can see here, advice is nothing but an actual implementation of aspects. So, in today's video, we will be talking about advice and its various types. Also, we will see what are the various ways in which these different advices can be implemented. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, as I told earlier, that advice refers to an actual implementation for the aspect. Okay, it's the actual code that you write which will implement your aspect. So, aspect is going to be more conceptual. As far as Spring is concerned, it supports only method level aspect implementation. Okay. If you want field level implementation, you will have to use something which is called as an aspect J implementation, which allows you to implement field level aspects also. But as far as Spring is concerned, it supports only method level aspects. Okay. Now, there are different types of aspects which are available in Spring. Like we have before advice, which will execute before the business logic. After advice, which will execute after the business logic. Throws advice, which will execute when an exception is thrown. And around advice, which executes before and after both the actual business logic. Okay. So let's get into detail of each of these and understand what they mean and how they can be implemented. So before advice is what we start with. Before advice is an advice that executes before any particular join point or your business code, but it is something which does not have the ability to stop the execution flow further. That is, what I mean here is that once the advice code is executed and the business code is executed, it will still go ahead and execute whatever remaining code is there unless and until it does not throw an exception. Now, as far as AOP is concerned, there are various different implementations of AOP available. Like one of the implementations is the traditional Spring implementation, which was done through interfaces, which was or you can say which was more applicable up to Spring 3. Post Spring 3, that particular implementation has been stopped, and there are other more popular implementations, like there are schema based implementations and there are aspect J implementations which are more popular. Okay. So, if I have to implement that lower level Spring AOP implementation, for that I will have to use an interface called as method before advice, which helps me in implementing the before advice, and a set of code or an advice that will execute before my actual business logic. Okay. If I want a schema based implementation, there is a tag that is AOP : before, which I'll have to use. And if I want aspect J style implementation, there is an annotation that is before annotation, which I'll have to use. In this particular video, we are not going to go into the details of this because we will be having future videos wherein we'll be talking about each of these implementations and we will see an example also for each of them. So in this video, we are just going to introduce ourselves with these different implementations. Okay. So this is about before advice, which executes before the join point. In case if you are not aware of what a join point is, you can refer to this particular video wherein I had spoken about the various AOP concepts. Okay. Going further, the after returning advice. Advice to be executed after the join point completes normally. Now this is very important, that the code that we are talking about after which this particular advice is going to run has to complete normally. That is very important. Okay. For example, if the method returns without throwing any exception. So if the method has completed its whole set of code and then it is returning, that is when after returning advice is going to execute. If there is some exceptional situation, in that case it will not execute. So this is when the code completes normally. Okay, again we have three different implementations. The lower level Spring AOP, for which we need to use the after returning advice interface. Then schema based implementation, for that we need to use the AOP : after returning tag. Okay, that is the tag that you need to use if you want a schema based implementation of your AOP after returning advice. And finally, as for aspect J implementation, you need the after running annotation which can be used over the method. So all these annotations that you see have to be written above the method on which you want to implement the advice. Okay, so if there is a code which is running as an after running advice, on top of that method you will say @after running. Okay, not on your target method. Okay, this is the method which contains the code for the after returning advice. So when the method returns normally the code that you want to execute, on top of that method you have to use the annotation after return. Okay, going further, we have after throwing advice. This is to be executed if the method exits by throwing an exception. So if you see the previous one, that was executed when the method returns normally, whereas this one is executed when the method throws an exception. Again, for lower level Spring AOP implementation, you need to use the throws advice interface. Okay, then for schema based implementation, you need to use after throwing tag, and for AspectJ implementation, you need to use the @after throwing annotation. Okay, so these are the three ways in which you can implement the after throwing advice. As I said earlier, after throwing advice is used in cases when the method throws an exception. Okay, going further, after finally advice. This advice to be executed regardless of the means by which the join point exists. Okay, a normal or an exceptional return. So this is something that will execute under any circumstance, whether the method or the join point code is returning successfully, or you can say normally, or whether it is returning in an exceptional situation. In both cases it will execute. Now here there is a little difference, that is for lower level Spring API implementation you have after advice interface, okay, which you need to use. For schema based implementation there is an after tag that you need to use. So it is not after finally as you must have expected. The tag that needs to be used is after tag, and for the AspectJ implementation we have the @after annotation. Again, this annotation needs to be on top of the method which contains the advice code, okay, and not the target one. Okay, now going further, the last one that we have is the around advice. Around advice, as I said earlier, is something that is going to surround your join point. That is, this particular set of code will execute before and after both. Okay, and for such an implementation we will need something which is called as a interceptor interface. Again, understand that this is one of the most common ways in which advices are implemented. Also, it is a very powerful way of implementing advices. Also, this allows you to customize your behavior, because there is a method inside this interceptor interface called as proceed. Okay, I repeat, there is a method called as proceed inside this interceptor interface which allows you to customize your behavior. That is, what do you want to do before and after the method invocation. You can customize that behavior. You can also control how do you want it to behave after the business logic has executed. So that can be controlled. It is also responsible for choosing whether to proceed. As I said earlier, you can choose whether you want to proceed to the next part or not, or maybe you want to continue when there is an exception or when there is a return value. So based on whatever kind of behavior, if you want, you can choose that with the help of interceptor. So this is, again, as I said earlier, a very powerful way of implementing advices. Also one of the most common ways of implementing advices. But it is always recommended that whenever you are implementing the advice, keep it very specific. So like, if I want an advice to execute only before my join point, I have to make sure that I am using a before advice. Similarly, if I want something to be executed after, I am using an after advice. Okay, don't use around advice, because you can control whether you want to go ahead or not. It is not recommended. It is always said that the more specific one you use, the more precise and more concise code implementations you will have. Okay, so it is always recommended that you have the more specific ones. As I said earlier, for lower level Spring AOP APIs, you have the interceptor interface. For schema based, you have a tag called as around tag which you can use. Okay, and for AspectJ implementation, you have the around annotation. Okay, so these are the various implementations of the different advices as we have seen earlier. That is before advice, after advice, throws advice, and around advice, wherein we saw before advice, after returning advice, then after throwing advice, after finally advice, and a rounded wise. So that is it for today. In case if you like my content, please like my videos. Also, I recommend each and every learner, please watch the videos end to end, because I don't want you to miss on to those small important details that I say during the video. So please request each and every one of you to watch my videos end to end, so that you gain maximum knowledge out of my videos. Also, in case if you have some questions, some doubts, please mention them in the comment section and I'll get back to you on them. Okay. Also, please share my videos with your family, friends, whoever it is applicable to, whoever who wants to learn Spring. Please share them with them, so that even they can gain out of my videos. That is it for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.